Hello, welcome. We're very excited for you to be joining us for our AI 101, the first of a series of webinars and discussions that are being sponsored by the Idaho State Board of Education. Special thanks to Heidi Eastrom and the Generative AI Fellowship for helping put these together. We would like to say right up front that we presented this live in front of a really nicely large group of folks the other week, and we accidentally lost the Zoom recording. So we are recording this a second time around, but just know that there are not any ongoing chats or interactions with the audience, unfortunately, because of that. So today is a very basic AI 101. We wanted to start with the foundational levels, understanding that some folks may or may not have even started playing around with the chatbots or the AI models. So in order to help inform some of our conversations moving forward, we wanted to make sure everybody had some of those basic pieces in place so they understand what it is we're talking about. My name is Jason Blomquist. I'm an assistant professor at the Boise State School of Nursing, and I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Liza Long.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liza Long. I'm an English professor at the College of Western Idaho. So thrilled to be working with Jason and with the State Board of Education on artificial intelligence. It's a passion that we share, and we've had a lot of fun. So today in our presentation, our goal is really to help you if you have not really interacted with a chatbot before, to break down that wall. And let's go ahead, get our hands dirty. We're going to have some fun actually learning a little bit about how large language models, that's what that LLM stands for, how they work. So you'll be playing with one today, interacting with an LLM. So you'll have a chance to create an artifact through some basic prompting. You'll evaluate that LLM output and think about what you might do next with large language models, either in your teaching or your research or your professional writing or all three. And then we'll also briefly introduce some concerns about large language model use in higher education. We're not going to spend as much time on academic integrity or plagiarism as some of you probably wish we will, but that can be a teaser for some future sessions. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And like I said, if you've never interacted, you're about to do it now. So I want to share, first of all, when we're talking about large language models, what we're talking about. And I've got the big five up here. I'll just show you these briefly. I want you to make a decision if you've never used any of these tools before. I want you to decide which one you want to use for our exercises today. So as you look at these, maybe think about some of their pros and cons. So this is ChatGPT, and there's both paid and free versions of ChatGPT. My own personal favorite, I think, Jason, would you second me on this, is Claude.
Right now, I absolutely love working with Claude. Yes.
Yeah, I really enjoy Claude. Google Gemini right here, and you can see I'm kind of, oh, it's already telling me some cool new toys that it has. Yay. For some of you, if you are a Microsoft school like CWI is, Copilot can be a fantastic tool. I have it open on Chrome, but I do recommend that you use it on the Edge browser if you're a Microsoft school. That's what I work with when I work with my students because they all have access to this. And last but not least, it's free, it's open, you don't need an account, Meta Llama. And also, if you're a nerd, this one is open source, so you can actually download the source code from Hugging Face, or you can interact with the AI. So some considerations to keep in mind, of course, would be whether they're paid versus free, how they were trained, like what was their data set, can they produce images or not? Some of them, like Claude or ChatGPT, can produce artifacts, code, presentations, handouts, images, and then also whether they have the ability to search the web or not. Did I miss any big things, Jason, that you want to add before we get into how these work?
No, at the basic level, I think those are certainly some considerations when you're thinking about which of these models is the right one for the project you're working on.
And if you've never tried one, if your school's a Google school, maybe try Gemini. If you're a Microsoft school, maybe try Copilot. ChatGPT is probably the one your students are all familiar with, so you might try that one as well. That Claude is the one Jason and I like. All right, Jason, take it away.
So we are not here tonight to give an introductory to computer science class, and obviously being from the School of Nursing and Liza being from humanities, we are not computer sciences or scientists ourselves, but we have discovered that both in understanding how to best interact with these tools and as we're starting to teach our students about how to interact with these tools, it's really important to understand some of the underlying basics of how they work so that we can understand what their output is and how we can or can't trust it or how we might want to use it in a better way. So when we talk about large language models, they're being trained on language. They are given a huge amount of data, hundreds of millions of tokens and pieces of data to go through. And what's different compared to other models is a large language model works on a neural network deep learning style of artificial intelligence, which means that when it is given all that data, the first step of training it is for it as a algorithm to go through and create its own patterns and learn from that data. That's called unsupervised training. So it's the equivalent of saying, hey, go out and scrape the entire internet on some levels and see what kind of patterns and recognitions you get from it. Now, obviously, that would give you certain outcomes, but that may not give you the outcomes that the people developing these models really want. So you follow that up with reinforced training with some human oversight, meaning that they look at what's coming out of the models and they tweak it and they think about whether that is the correct answer or the way it should be producing output, and are able to go back in and tweak some of those models to change some of the outcomes. So one thing to really stop and think about is, because of the output and how realistic it feels and how conversational it feels, it's really easy to start thinking that some of these large language models understand what they're talking about or are actually thinking about these things. And that's really not true. That's not how it's working. When these models take that data, it's breaking down the language into chunks, and those chunks are called tokens within the AI community. And each of those tokens, that might be a word, it might be part of a word, it might be a contextual piece of a sentence. Each of those are converted to a numerical data point. And then what a large language model is doing is actually thinking about the probability of how those tokens are related to each other. So in the background, it's literally just doing math. If I say the word nurse, it is using that token and thinking about what other pieces of information it has that is the most probable next piece of that sentence. So when we start to think about that, that means our large language models don't actually know anything. They have no understanding of what the words mean, what the context of those words mean, or what the definitions of those words are. It's simply creating mathematical probabilities and thinking about what the next most probable token is. So if you
Yeah.
stop to think about that for a moment, that's actually pretty amazing from a mathematical and computer science point of view. But it also means that we have opportunities to think about how we either trust or think about the accuracy or think about what is actually coming out on the output side of these.
Yeah, if I could add really quickly too, Jason, a lot of people ask me what GPT stands for. And so we have it here. It's generative pre-trained transformer. So generative means it's making up new things. It's not a computer in the way we've traditionally thought of computers like search engines. Pre-trained is that training process Jason described. And transformer is the interesting part here for me. It means that it has learned to pay attention to certain things, like what Jason was explaining with nurse. And now Jason's going to get into more of what this all means.
Yep. So I think a really important part to stop and think about is that what is coming out of the end of an LLM is not necessarily fact or truth or accurate, right? It is creatively generating things based on mathematical probabilities. So that means that we have to really think about it from a different point of view than, say, we've all been trained to think about a Google search, where we're breaking it down to keywords and expecting factual content to come out. But LLMs are really giving us more probabilities and patterns. And it does a really great job. If you get trained on a huge corpus of data, those patterns and probabilities can be fairly accurate. But we do need to watch out for the chance of a hallucination. And that term is when the generative part of the LLM is creating random connections, random probabilities that may not have factual output when we put that back into our context. So pause for a second and think about that. Means that there's some really great, interesting uses. It could be very creative. It might think patterns, or it might think of connections that we did not think of as the user. But at the same time, if we're trying to use these tools in a high stakes situation where we need 100% accuracy, that's not where they're at right now. Now, there's a lot of work being done to limit the amount of hallucinations and making the output more and more accurate and factual, but there is still a possibility of some hallucinations. So again, this isn't a search engine. We really need to think about interacting with these in a different way. These are tools that we can interact with on more of a conversational, interactive way. And Liza's going to share with us a little more about that.
Yeah, but first, let's pause for a minute. I asked you to make sure that you had created an account, and we don't have our live audience here. They asked us some interesting questions when we did our live session, but I do want you to pause and make sure that you've got that account up and ready. And so, like, if I'll just show ChatGPT, you've got this little message box that's kind of ready for you to input some things. And next, that's what we'll be doing pretty soon. So I'm going to explain a little bit more first to you about um, some principles that you can use as you prepare to interact with generative artificial intelligence. Maybe you've tried it before just once and it wasn't particularly useful or helpful to you, or maybe you just haven't really managed to consider a use case in your own life and what you teach and what your students are doing. But I can tell you that as of fall 2024, 100% of my students told me they're using these tools. So I do feel like it's important at this point for us at least to be familiar with the technology in the classroom so that we can help our students to learn how to use these tools responsibly, keeping all of those issues that Jason brought up in mind. So Ethan Mollick's book, Co-Intelligence, is one of my favorite books to recommend to get started with exploring AI. And at CWI, we read it as part of a book group last summer. And he has these 4 principles that I've got on the screen here. And the first one is that you will invite AI to the table for everything. So what does that mean? Anytime you've got a task, maybe you're designing a rubric, maybe you're creating discussion board prompts, anything that you could really think of, ask AI, see what AI can do for you. Sometimes you'll find that AI is a useful partner in co-creating, and sometimes you'll find that it's not really something that you need or want to use AI for, but give AI a shot with everything that you're trying in your workplace. The second point is the one that I try to stress with my students, and I'm going to stress it with you. You need to be the human in the loop at all times. Jason made it really clear that these tools aren't thinking, and they're only really as good as the human in the loop can be to leverage them for helping us to augment what we do and to help us achieve our goals. So always be the human in the loop. You are accountable for the accuracy, for the output of these bots. Make sure that you take that accountability seriously. The third one might seem a little weird. I just told you AI doesn't think, but treating AI as a person when you prompt turns out to be a particularly helpful way to interact with these tools. So my students always laugh at me. I will use please and thank you with AI. I will tell AI that I need its help. I do treat it when I'm talking to it conversationally. For me, prompting isn't here is a prompt to produce an artifact. It's very often a conversation where we're talking back and forth about a problem, brainstorming ideas. So treating an AI as a person, that's what we mean. Like in conversation, treat your experience less as that Google search Jason talked about and more as a conversation with a person. The fourth point, I know Jason and I were both fairly early adopters, so we have found this to be true. Assume if you've never used AI before that what you're about to do will be the worst AI you'll ever use. We have seen amazing and astonishing increases in the capabilities of these tools. And I circled back to that first point, invite AI to the table for everything. I once asked AI if it could help me create APA references for my students, and it couldn't. It was terrible. As of 3 weeks ago, it can. So if AI doesn't work for you one time, try it in 3 weeks. Who knows? It might be something that is ready to work for you now. So let's get into it. You've got your screen open. I'm going to share some
Liza, if I
tips.
could interject
Oh,
one thing before we move
absolutely.
on.
Yeah.
I'd like to, with that comment of inviting AI to the table for everything, I'd like to invite all of us as educators in Idaho to think about exploring with AI, not because we have to use it or need to use it, but I think this is new enough that we don't know how it could or could not be used. I think we're going to
Mhm.
come to a point where there are certain things that are going to be very helpful and beneficial to us and to our students' learning. And I think we're going to find ways that it is going to be very detrimental. And we need to be the explorers right now as we understand what this new technology looks like and how it could impact learning.
That's a really important point, Jason. And also to that point, I'm teaching with AI in my English 102 class, and that's exactly the approach we're taking. We are inviting AI to the table for every step of the writing process, but we're focusing very intentionally on which steps we enjoy doing as a human. Like AI might be good at finding sources, but I actually really like finding my own, that type of thing, right? So finding out what we enjoy doing as well as what it's useful for, I think is such an important point. So at this point, you should have your screen open. You'll have a little window. How do we prompt? Well, it starts with that little window. And this, again, these are some tips that Jason and I have learned through prompting, and also Ethan Mollick does a really great job of outlining some of this. So I like you to start with a task. Think about what you want that LLM to do. Do you want it to create a rubric? Do you want it to create a discussion board post? Do you need an outline for a presentation? What do you want it to do? Then think about your format. How do you need that formatted? Do you need bullet points? Do you need the form of a letter? Are you writing a recommendation letter for a student? Oh, I would never use, of course I use AI for that, right? Uh, you know, so think about the format. Voice. So I also call that the role. I like to tell the LLM who I want it to be, and I like to be very specific. For example, I might tell it if I'm creating a rubric that it's an expert in instructional design and that it has a PhD in English literature, right? So I'm giving it that expertise and that role so that it comes into the conversation prepared to be that thinker for me. It's not really thinking, but you get what I mean. Context. Why do you need this? Think about what you need from it, and be able to maybe even explain why it's important. And then be as detailed and specific as possible. And Jason has a great picture here that I know he made with a text prompt. So Jason, what do you have to add to that? What other tips do you have for prompting?
So I think if you're just getting started with LLMs, this sounds really uh, formatted and maybe even a little silly when we're saying like give it roles and whatnot. But as you play around and experiment with conversations with LLMs, you do find that the more specific you can be, the better results you're going to get. Going back to Ethan Mollick and his book Co-Intelligence, he had a great analogy of treat an LLM like an overeager new intern.
Love
They
that.
may or may not know what they don't know yet, but the more you can give them, the more likely you are to get the product back out that you're looking for.
I love that metaphor. That's like a whole other conversation because I would love for all of us to think about the metaphors we use for these tools, right? But all right, so let's do it. We are going to get into the weeds. You've got your box open, and now you are going to try it. And Jason and I, since we're recording this again, we're going to keep going in the presentation, but this is the point where you could pause the video. I want you to have that screen open. I've given you an example. It really does help me with rough drafts of discussion board prompts. So this is a real world example for me. And you can see an example of what a chat might look like. But so we'll hit pause. But other than that, we're going to keep going and share some more ideas. So Jason, take it away with more ideas with LLMs.
Excellent. So I'm hoping that you found some interesting outcomes when you hit pause and played with that. A few of you might have run into the idea that if you're putting a lot of prompts in, if you're using a free version, you might run into a prompt limit where it might have said you're out of time or you don't get any more questions for a little while. Know that is one of the risks and limitations of using the free versions versus some of the paid versions. Something to consider if you are asking your students to use some of these tools. But we also said try AI for everything just to see what it can and can't do. A few other topics that I've tried or you might use when exploring is thinking about, hey, I'm struggling to pick a topic for an assignment. Help me talk through it. Here's something I'm interested in. Here's some ideas I already have. What am I missing? What am I not picking up on? Sometimes I use a help me understand. Uh, I think this is one where this is a spot where it's pointed out to me where sometimes it can be very accurate and sometimes it can go a little astray, and helping to really think about the idea that we need to validate. But as a first step, helping me understand is a great prompt that I've started to use. I've given it a paragraph from an article that I was reading and saying, hey, I'm really struggling to really pick through what this actually means. Could you help discuss it with me? And that's a really distinct piece of you can say, hey, tell me about this. Or if you say, discuss it with me, you might get a different outcome. You might get it to start questioning you and helping you think through things instead of just giving it to you. Sometimes they do a how do I get started? Help me pick a name for, There's lots of different ways that we can try to use these. An example I gave the other day is I have a old recipe for banana bread that used to work really, really well when I lived in a different part of the country, and it wasn't working as well here in the high desert atmosphere of Boise. I actually gave an LLM the recipe and described my problem, and it helped me come up with some new variations of that recipe that worked really well. So just getting creative in what you attempt and what you try and see what happens.
Jason, I think you also mentioned you took a picture of what was in your fridge or your
Oh yeah.
cupboard or something. I've done that too and said, "Hey, ChatGPT, help me create a meal out of this." So we'll solve food waste with these tools. That's some great ideas, all of those. So just some tips and some reminders as you think about working with those tools. Jason, I already kind of said this, but it's really important for you, the human in the loop, to evaluate the results. I often tell my students, Wikipedia is even a better place, at least for me right now, to get basic background information. I wouldn't necessarily go to a chatbot. That might change over time, but right now it's important to evaluate those results for sure. A lot of times people will find they're not liking what they get. And if you don't succeed at first, try again. So the idea of prompting as being an iterative process where you do it again and again, it's built right in. I can, like, if I asked it something here and I didn't like it, it would give me the option to regenerate and I would be able to do that. But also sometimes I just need to talk to it differently. I have
Mhm.
asked it, how can I improve this prompt? And it can help me think through that. So I have really enjoyed talking to it just to get a second set of opinions. A conversation I've been having all summer with various LLMs is about the skills that I need to teach students through the college essay. And quite frankly, what other assignments, given the advent of these new technologies, could I use to teach the same skills? So I've changed some of how I teach writing just based on those conversations with large language models. You can ask it, you can just tell it what you want to do and then ask it what information it needs to help refine your own prompt. And I think something as easy as I need ideas for an in-class activity, it will brainstorm a lot of different ones. That's one thing I've enjoyed using it for. If I am trying to teach a concept and I'm busy, right? I can ask it for some various ideas and then I'm the human in the loop. I choose what I want to do. Jason, anything else you've got to add on this before we move on?
Just real quickly, if you truly are brand new to working with these, know when we talk about iterating and talking with it, you don't need to start a new chat every single time
Oh,
because
good
it
point.
is referencing everything that you've already been talking about
Good
within that chat.
point.
Now, that being said, it is also thinking about and referencing everything in that chat. So if I wanted to start a completely new project or a completely different question, I may want to start a new chat so I'm not muddying the waters between those two streams of thought.
That's a great point. I just pulled up a chat GPT chat on that APA citation that I talked about, and you can see my students and I were going through quite a few different citations. That's called the context window. It remembers our conversation. I don't have to explain the task to it again and again. So that was a really good point. Thanks, Jason. All right, I'm turning things over to you for privacy considerations. Always important.
Yes. So obviously, when we go back to thinking about how these models have been trained and developed, we're talking about taking a lot of information from a lot of sources. There's a lot of controversy in the world right now about some of the models with how they gathered their information, and there's some big lawsuits around copyrighted materials and accessing places that they probably shouldn't have. But we also really need to think about it from the point of view of what we are giving to the models and what we're taking out. Some models are using your inputs, whether that means I'm uploading a data set or whether I'm giving it a PDF of my work or even just cutting and pasting or even just what I'm asking it. Some models are using that to help train the model further. So we need to really think about what we're putting in there because there's a chance that that now is being put into that larger corpus of data. So this table here is a really short and not completely exclusive list of how the different major models are using things. So for example, Claude from the company Anthropic, by default, they are saying they are not using any of your data that you're putting in or getting out as part of the training model. Uh, in a different light, OpenAI, who does Chat GPT, by default, they are using everything that you're putting in as part of the training, but you can go to the settings and change that. On the other side, Google and Gemini have a much more vague. They're saying, yes, they're using a lot of things for quality improvement, but it's a little mixed as to what and how you can limit that. So we need to think about that from a point of view because a lot of us are using some very sensitive data. For example, in healthcare, I would absolutely not put anything that is protected under HIPAA in one of these models right now. In education, we need to think about our students' work and our FERPA responsibilities. If you're doing research, obviously there's some very strict rules and regulations around data. So we need to think about that. The bottom line is that any of these commercially available models, like you just played with today, they are going to be more risky for that than others. There are ways that organizations, such as our universities or health systems, can purchase access to a more private and secure instance of some of these models, and then they may have different rules, and you may be allowed to use more sensitive information. But those are things that you really need to be thoughtful of so you know where you're at and what you're doing so that you don't do any accidental leakage of private information. If you're feeling nervous about it, my advice right now would be don't put the information in the tool if you're feeling nervous until you can get better information and think about that.
I love that advice. And I briefly showed the presentation that we talked about here. If you want links to any of these things, they're all built into our presentation. So we'll make sure that that's available. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we can put it in the comments or something on the YouTube channel, Jason. So we've got links to the presentation.
And I think this might be a good point to talk about a couple of things that came up from questions when we did this live. There are a few questions around the idea of copyright and citing things, that type of thing. So like I mentioned, there are a lot of lawsuits out there right now as far as copyright around what is being used to train these models. On the other side, just so you know, right now with the way the laws in the United States are set up, anything produced by a large language model or a generative AI is not able to be used in a copyright moving forward. So that means that if you generate a picture or if you generate a paper, that is not copyrightable.
Yeah,
Blinking on my word
I
right
know.
now. I'm thinking,
We're not attorneys, so we don't
yes,
we don't have to know perfectly, but
yeah.
check with your attorney.
Check with your attorney if you're doing anything that you think is work and uh, and that type of thing. Now, somebody also asked if I'm using generated images, just like clip art versions, can I use those? And yes, that is something that it seems to be okay at the moment. You might have noticed in our presentation that we've chosen to cite those just as generated by AI as well. And a lot of our professional organizations, as Liza had mentioned, APA specifically, do have some guidelines out now around how to cite the various uses of AI. So that might be something to look at if you're using a particular writing style or methodology.
I put up on the screen, I've got a chapter in an open textbook, Write What Matters, that it summarizes MLA and APA style, the two most common for students, and it is up to date. So that will, if you ever have questions about that, feel free to reach out. But yeah, there's a lot here, obviously, which is why we're saying stay tuned. Right. So a big question that we get is obviously around academic integrity. And I hinted at that at the beginning. And for myself as a teacher who has embraced these tools and I'm using them in the classroom, I have done a mindset shift, excuse me. So instead of thinking, how do I catch cheaters, people who are using these tools inappropriately, instead I'm focusing on how can I encourage the behaviors that I want. And honestly, just by even allowing a classroom where we can have these hard conversations where we're not always right, where students might not use AI in appropriate ways, but feel comfortable and fine disclosing AI use, it's really helped us all to build a culture where we're focusing on using the tools to augment, not replace human intelligence. So my students are also very concerned about academic integrity. Jason, I think yours are as well. They don't want to necessarily cheat, right? So thinking in terms of that mindset shift where we're not trying to catch the cheaters, we're trying to think about how we can encourage behaviors we want to see from students. I think that's very important. Just a note that plagiarism checkers don't work. You've probably figured that out, but Turnitin is not going to have a magic bullet for us. That's not going to exist. And Jason, you wanted to add something too.
Well, I was going to add, I agree absolutely that my students are as worried about academic integrity as you are, and they want to also make sure that they're not being accused of things that they haven't
Right.
done in this muddled area. And a lot of my students are really also very concerned about how using these tools may or may not affect their learning. So I just putting this out there as a plug again. That's why we need to start learning about this and having these conversations both with our fellow colleagues and with our students, because we're all in this learning together right now.
And you just reminded me of a book that has a lot of Idaho authors in it. AI and Ethics in Higher Education just came out. This is student facing, and it's got even a chapter in how can students have those hard conversations with professors about academic integrity. So I think we're about ready to leave you. Hopefully you've learned a little bit about LLMs. There's so much more to learn, as you can see. And I hope that you had a positive experience interacting with a large language model, and that you started to think of some ways that you might be able to incorporate this either in your professional work or in your teaching or both. This is not the end of the conversation though. So we do have 2 additional workshops set, and we have drop-in hours, and we are very much looking for your contributions. We want to be able to track the interesting and fun things that Idaho instructors and higher ed professionals are doing with artificial intelligence. So we've got this link to a resource form. If you have a great resource you want to share, a lesson plan, a good blog that people should follow, with as much as possible an Idaho emphasis, we would really love for you to fill out that form. And then we are creating this guide to teaching and learning with artificial intelligence. So this link is live. You can submit things to us now, and we're updating the publication as we go. So yeah, I think that's where we're at. Jason, there's a lot of stuff to cover.
Yes, please do reach out to us. Liza and I will be the fellows for the 24-25 academic year, and we want to know what you need, and we want to know what types of conversations you want to have. This can be an exciting and scary concept all at the same time. We're not here to say what we should do or have to do, but we're here to help create those conversations so that we can come around this as a team of colleagues and educators across the state to better serve our students and understand this new technology.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jason. And thank you to everyone watching for your time. And please do reach out if you have questions. Happy prompting.